Wow, you guys settled down all on your own. That's impressive. The first service, they kept going and going, greeting and greeting. I had to tell them to settle down. Just kidding. So good morning, everyone. We're going to be in Mark chapter 13 today. So if you want to turn there, if we want to have a reader, we're going to go through Mark 13, verses 1 through 8. So welcome to everyone. Welcome to those watching on live stream. Who's excited about this weather, huh? I love this stuff. I love the hot, sweaty days, so I'm in heaven right now. Hopefully it won't be as hot next week when we're outside, right? But thank God for this lovely weather. So we're picking up in Mark chapter 13, and if you missed last week, Pastor Aaron did the message last week. You could find that on our website, as well as just a whole treasure troves of our sermons here going for years back. So if you missed that, you can go back and catch Mark chapter 12 with the story of the widow and her mites and giving and all that. So I encourage you to check that out if you missed it. But we're in Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. Do we have a reader for us this morning? Over here. Thank you.
As he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another which will not be torn down." And as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him privately. "Tell us, when will these things be, and when will the sign be when all things are going to be fulfilled?" And Jesus began to say to them, "See to it that no one misleads you. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and will mislead many. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be frightened. These things must take place, but that's not the end yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will also be famines. These things are merely the beginning of birth pangs."
All right, thank you. I like the enthusiasm as the disciples are asking Jesus these questions. I love it. Thank you for reading. So we're at this story, and you guys, if you've listened to me preach before, I've been helping out once a month for a number of years. You guys will probably know I don't ever do PowerPoints. I'm usually just sitting here on a stool with the Bible, and I try and stay away from PowerPoints because I'm not very good at putting them together and flipping through slides. But I'm taking a gamble this morning, and I've got some slides to go with you this morning. Partly because I'm a type of guy, I like having like a whole chapter to go through, and Pastor Joe only gave me 8 verses this morning, so I felt like locked behind a cage. Only 8 verses. That's like torture for me. But as I was thinking and praying about it, I kind of got the idea to talk about the temple, because that's what's going on here, right? The disciples and Jesus, they're all hanging out in this temple, and Jesus spends a lot of time during his ministry in the temple. So if you haven't been born and raised in the church, you might not even realize what the temple is and what it's for. So I thought if it's all right with you guys, we could go through a little bit of history this morning about the history of the temple and Jerusalem as a nation and a city and whatnot. So here's these guys admiring the temple. So they're here in this area right here. Now this is called Herod's temple that he built for them, and we're going to go through some history before we get to this point in a little bit. But Jesus and his disciples are right here right now. This is the outer area here is called the court of the Gentiles, so anyone could be in this outside area, okay? And Jesus and his disciples are in here right now talking with the religious rulers and whatnot, and this is the women's court, so you had to be Jewish to be in here, but this area was reserved just for the men. This is the court of the Israelites, so you had to be a man to be in there, because that's what religion does. It divides people, right? So they're hanging out here, and disciples start, asking them these questions, and And they ask him, what's the sign of the end times? And they're talking to him about the temple, and he says this temple is going to be destroyed. Not one stone is going to be left standing on another. And for them, this blows their mind. They immediately put it together. They associated the temple being destroyed with the end times, like the end of the world. And to be fair, that's what it would kind of like. That would be what it would kind of like be for us if, say, our nation's capital was completely wiped out. Imagine the White House and the Capitol and all that. Like, our sense of identity as America, a nation, it'd be like gone. Like, we're the red, white, and blue. Like, all these famous areas would be gone. The identity of our nation, almost, right? God forbid that should happen. So their whole world was like revolved around this temple. But it didn't always look like this. In fact, modern day, it looks like this. This is the city of Jerusalem. And right here is the Temple Mount. Here's the extension of the mount that Herod put on. Here's the Kidron Valley. And like up here is starting to be like the Mountain of Olives right here. And it looks much, much different today than it did back then. For one thing, this kind of looks like a blanket, like a nice even layer of city, right? Well, it wasn't anything like that. There was a lot of mountains and curves back then, which we'll see in just a moment. There weren't gravestones here for certain until the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic faith came in. They put all those cemeteries there to keep for the prophesied Jewish Messiah from coming through. You wouldn't want to walk through unclean grounds. So they sealed this gate up to try and stop a prophecy from occurring. Little did they understand that Jesus has actually already been through there, and he would have the power to make that land clean if he did want to walk through the graveyard anyway. So anyhow, so this looks completely different. In fact, back in Jesus' times, this would be about the size of the city during the time that Jesus was there. So we go to this picture, and we can see that this is what it would have looked like before anyone had settled there. We have the Mount of Olives all the way to the right. We have Mount Moriah, which is the main heart of Jerusalem, as we're going to see in a few minutes, and then the Western Mountains on that side. But you can see there's nothing even about this land. It's very mountainous, up and down. In fact, throughout the Bible, whenever it references going to Jerusalem, they always reference that you go up to Jerusalem. Even if you're in the northern part of Israel and you're going south to reach Jerusalem, you would still say, let us go up to Jerusalem. And the reason for that is because in order to get into the heart of the city, you have to go up, no matter what direction you come from. So, so this is an artist's rendition of what the topography would look like before anyone had settled there. Now, as we go through the Bible and the Old Testament, some of the stories here, can anyone guess the very first story that takes place on this area of land? Who can guess the first story? Abram, specifically, before his name was changed. And who did he interact with? This one stumped the first service, too. So Melchizedek. And just ignore these guys up there for a moment. But Melchizedek came out to greet Abram when Abram went off on his campaign to go get his nephew Lot back, and he fought some battles, and he was coming back through this area, and Melchizedek, the king priest, came out to greet him, came out with bread and wine. Does that bring up any kind of symbolism for us today, bread and wine in the church? So he came out and greeted Abram at that time, and they had their interaction, which is really still a mysterious interaction. We still don't even know a whole lot about it, to be honest. But it's a very interesting interaction. So he was a king priest, so that means he was making sacrifices and stuff like that. One of the things that makes this area important is not only how easy it would to defend this place, but also right here, there's a water source, and that's called the Gihon Spring. What's the most important thing you could have in the middle of the desert if you want to create a city? Water, right? So this spring, it's named after like a gushing spring, that it just gushed water out. So in the middle of the desert, there's a spring here. So Melchizedek was able to have this city here, and that city was called Salem. Salem. Mispronouncing it because I'm a New Englander now, and New Englanders pronounce it as Salem, right? There you go. Salem means peace, so this was a peaceful city. They don't have any walls up. Jerusalem means city of peace, which in hindsight and the view of history is ironic if not sad, because it has been anything but a city of peace. It's been the least peaceful city in all the world. Constant, nonstop battles. Going back to that one picture of Jerusalem of modern day, the city of Jerusalem has been burned to the ground at least 2 or 3 times, possibly more, and it's been conquered and battled over for 40 plus times. So, you just have thousands of years of war and destruction and building up. It'd be like, if Uncasville was completely wiped out and then, sat for 100 years, and then people came and rebuilt something, a whole land around here, and then another few 100 years go by and it's destroyed again, and then more is built, and just 1,000 years of destruction and rebuilding, destruction, rebuilding. You would not recognize this place, in 1,000 years from now if all that happened. Anyways, getting a little sidetracked. So Melchizedek's here, and excuse me. What's semi-interesting is that 2011, there's an archaeologist named Eli Shukron, who found buried under just tons of earth and buildings and whatnot, this area that looked like it could possibly be the cave, the temple of Melchizedek. Here we have these markings in the ground, these carvings, which would have been set up for animal like wooden stands to be placed in the ground to hold animals as they waited to be sacrificed. Here we can see where the blood would flow down as they sacrifice animals, and wine press and mikvah. And is this the temple of Melchizedek? We don't know. There's no way to say for certain. But the archaeologist who found it says it is absolutely Melchizedek's temple. Who knows? Just kind of speculation. But I think it's kind of fun to point out things like this. What if? That would be kind of cool, right? Anyways, so come on now. Oh, my clicker stopped. There we go. Did the battery run out? I might have killed the battery. Okay. So we get back to Abraham now, whose name was, God changed his name to Abraham, and this is the story of him and Isaac, right? God tells him to take his son. This isn't life to scale, just so you know. They didn't just walk over mountains to get up there. Okay. Just want to point that out in case anyone thought, that's a really small mountain. But they're climbing up to the top here, right? And up here is the very, tip top of the mountain, a rock up there, which, is, they believe that Abraham would set his son up to sacrifice. And at the very last minute, what happened? God intervened, provided a ram to be sacrificed instead. And the name of this mountain is Mount Moriah. Okay, so that's kind of important as we continue on. It's a very important name. So we get through this story, and the next, we fast forward over years and tons of story that takes place in Genesis, and Abraham's son Isaac has Jacob. God gives Jacob a different name, Israel, and he has a bunch of sons who go through a lot of drama, who end up selling one of their brothers, and yada, yada, yada. They end up in Egypt for 400 years, right? And I just skipped through all of Genesis just now, right? But we get to the point where they're in Egypt for 400 years, and then the next story we read is, of course, of Moses, right? And God bringing up Moses and delivering the people out of Egypt. And one of the first things he does is he tells Moses to build a tabernacle, right? This clicker really doesn't want to work anymore. I think you're going to have to walk me through the rest of the slides back there. Okay, right there. So there's an artist's rendition of what the tabernacle would have looked like. And God was very specific in the way he instructed them to build the tabernacle. There's an altar and fire to burn the sacrifices, and a washing, a thing to wash. Inside the tabernacle, there'd be the candles and the showbread. And the most important part was the very end back room of the tabernacle, where there's a curtain dividing the front and the back. And what's so important about the back end? It's the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant sat, right? And the Ark of the Covenant, on top of it, if you've seen Indiana Jones, you'll know this, that on top of it, there's two cherubim whose wings sit out and touch each other, right? Don't get your information from Indiana Jones, by the way. It's not perfect. But the priest would enter that back room, the Holy of Holies, once a year and sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on that mercy seat, and God's presence would come down and fill that room. And only the high priest was allowed to be in that room at that time. So, a very, very important place. So, long story short, they continue to wander through the desert for 40-something years. Then we get to the stories of Joshua, who leads the people into the promised land. We got the story of like Jericho and all that, fun stuff. And then we get to the book of Judges, where we hear stories of Gideon and the fleece and the soldiers and the lamps and Samson, right? All these judges. And then we finally get to the book of 1 Samuel, where we start talking about kings, right? God sets up some kings for the first time. The first king, Saul, really wasn't that great, so God anointed David to be the king. And David was a man after God's own heart, but he was a warrior that the Lord used very specifically. And this is about the year 1003 BC, by the way. And David gets to the land of Jerusalem, but by this time, in the year 1003 BC, the Jebusites have taken over this land, and they built this little fortress. They built a fortress over the spring that we talked about earlier. So they were defending the city, and no army had successfully taken over the city. Well, David comes up with a plan where he has some men sneak in through the water source, and I wish we had more time just to talk about this. This would have been an amazing operation. They had to crawl through these crevices of this water stream up this crazy channel that goes way up, vertically through the shaft and through. It would have been an amazing tactical move. Anyways, they get into the city. Maybe they open up the city gates or they take it over. David gets into the city. He pulls down the fortress that was at the top corner here, and David builds himself a palace. And I just want to take a minute and appreciate what the view would have been from that top of his palace. He would have been able to see everything, which coincidentally would explain how it was so easy to creep on Bathsheba as she was bathing. But he would have had an amazing view from up there, right? So anyways, King David, he wants to build a temple up there. He says, it's not right for me to have this awesome palace and the Lord to still be using this dirty old tent that's been thousands or hundreds of years in the desert and all this and dragged around from place to place. But God said, no, you can't build me a temple because you have too much blood on your hands. So what David did do is he prepared as much as he could. He got the top of the temple mount ready. Oh, here's a picture of modern day Jerusalem and the city. This is called the City of David, this area, because it was David's city that he took over, right? So you can just barely see it today. But anyways, he was bummed out that he couldn't build the temple, but he did build an altar there. He bought the land from a Jebusite who had been using it as a threshing floor. He bought the land, he set up an altar, and there's that rock, the very tip top of Moriah. Keep that in mind. We're still saving that for later. And then his son Solomon was able to build a temple right there in place, right? And this would have been quite the glorious temple. And Solomon, he didn't just stop there. Solomon built a whole lot more than the temple. He built tons of stuff. He built a new throne room, the column hall, the forest house of Lebanon, the court, the temple. He built himself, because his dad's palace wasn't good enough. He had to build himself his own palace. But if you had 700 wives and 300 concubines, you might need a new palace too, with a little more space. I joke, but sadly, what's so sad about Solomon is God gave him great wisdom. He was the richest man who ever walked this planet. In fact, today we would compare his bank account. He'd be way more rich than Elon Musk. He could buy Twitter, Facebook, like all of it. He could buy all the social medias, right? YouTube, everything all at once, and it would still be, pennies in the bucket for him. He was a trillionaire by how we would count money today. And he was filled with wisdom, but because he had so many wives and so many foreign wives, some of that pagan religion started to creep into his own lifestyle, and he didn't have the greatest ending, but he was a good king. He did very well. The kingdom was blessed under his rule. But his son Rehoboam, who took over next, he did not do a good job. He immediately made everyone upset, and the kingdom split into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, right? And time and years go by, and we get to about the 716 BC year, 716 BC, and we get to King Hezekiah, and he was a pretty good king as far as kings go. He expanded the land even more. He built this big old wall right here as the city was growing and whatnot. He built a few things. He built himself a new palace. Apparently it's like a thing. You become king, you build yourself a palace or something. So he did pretty well. In fact, he was a good enough king that when the Assyrian army came down, they wiped out the northern kingdom. They came down and the Assyrians wanted to take out this kingdom as well. And here's a story for you. Hezekiah prayed, and he was working, with the prophets, and he prayed that God would deliver them. And so God sent one angel, and overnight that one angel wiped out 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. One angel versus an entire army. Just thinking about that makes me think I have no reason to fear anything in my life, because if I got a guardian angel hanging over my shoulder somewhere, if we all do, God can protect us through anything, right? Anyways, there's some cool Bible stories, throughout all those books and kings and stories and whatnot. Anyways, fast forwarding, we're going like crazy time traveling here. We get through another 70 years, and there's, again, not so good kings that come and go. And there's one guy who comes down to conquer the land. And who's that guy? Anyone? King Nebuchadnezzar, right? And he comes down, and he ends up wiping out the city and burning it to the ground. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, he actually came down and installed a new king over Israel, saying, all right, I'll give you a chance. You just have your own little kingdom. You just pay tribute to me, and I'll leave you guys be. That king was horrible, so then he put another king in. That king was horrible. Another king. Went through several kings in a very short amount of time. So finally, King Nebuchadnezzar had enough. He came down and wiped out the whole place. A pretty gruesome story at the end of that one. Zedekiah, who was the last king, talk about the absolute opposite of King David, a warrior king. This guy, he ran with his tail tucked between his legs. When the army came down, he tried to secretly escape and run away with his family himself in the darkness of night. Well, it didn't work out too well. The army caught him, murdered his children in front of him, and then immediately plucked out his eyes and carried him off to Babylon. Could you imagine? It's the last thing you see. A horrible, gruesome, ugh. And I'm telling you, if they made movies about this stuff from these Bible stories, would be rated R. So, anyways, King Nebuchadnezzar burns this place to the ground. It's very sad. They're brought off in captivity to Babylon. It's so sad. Jeremiah writes the book of Lamentations, first and second. This is some serious lamenting to write 2 whole books of Lamentations, right? Well, time goes by, another 70 years go by, and God starts to bring his people back into the land. The Persian king who now rules the land allows a guy named Zerubbabel to come back to the land of Jerusalem. And the book of Ezra records this. So Zerubbabel starts building the foundation for the new temple that's going to be built. And then Ezra comes on the scene about 60 years after that. So Zerubbabel, he's around 538 to 515 BC, and Ezra about 60 years after that. And he helps unite the people to build the temple. It's not nearly as shiny and impressive as Solomon's temple, but it gets the job done. And then there's another guy named Nehemiah. He comes down to help restore the walls of the city, because the people who started inhabiting the land after the Jews were taken away, they start attacking the Jews trying to rebuild. So Nehemiah hears about that. His heart is troubled. He gets permission to come back down. And he starts rebuilding the walls. And you can see this is a manly man right there. Look at him pointing at those walls. He's got the sword on his hip, because they had to build with a hammer in one hand, a sword in the other, right? So they get the walls of the city the city slowly coming back together. And then we fast forward again to the time of King Herod. And he starts this project in about the year 20 BC. Now, King Herod, the title king, we almost can get the wrong impression. King was more like a governor. The emperor was really the ruler of the land. So like we could imagine like our president is the emperor. King Herod would be like the governor of Connecticut or whatever. And I don't want to offend anyone on either side of the aisle. That's either a terrible analogy or a great analogy. I don't know, but I don't want to get in trouble here. I'm just saying like that's the best way you can compare it. But King Herod, he's a builder. He builds huge things. He built the fortress of Masada. He built up other cities, and he decides to build the temple for the Jews. He wants to make them happy. It's not that he's a good Jewish guy and he wants to make the Jews, a nice temple because he's just such a nice guy. He built pagan temples for other, religions and whatnot. But he knew the best way to try and appease the Jews and keep them happy was to build this new temple. They didn't trust him at first. When he came to them with these plans, he had to go out and have his men quarry all the stones and bring all the building materials before they would let him do the temple, because they didn't trust him. Like, okay, but now that we see you're ready to go, you're going to actually follow through on your word. So they let him come in and take care of it. And the first thing he did was double the size of the Temple Mount. So when we see pictures of Jerusalem today, that Temple Mount is literally twice as big as it was when when Solomon built his. So you can see this yellow outline. That would be about the size of King Solomon's temple. And then Herod, he expanded it to the north, to the west, and to the south. He couldn't expand it to the east. Why? Because there's a big valley right there, the Kidron Valley, right? So there's no room to expand it out that way. But literally doubled the size of the Temple Mount. And then he built. And when I say he built big time. So here's a nice picture. This is a great rendition, I think, of what, the temple would have looked like. So again, we see, most of the city in the background there that was rebuilt. We see this outer court that I was talking about, the court of the Gentiles, the women's court, and the court of the Israelites there. You see how it's covered in gold? This temple was like covered in gold, according to outside references of the Bible. And just gold, like a golden crown, basically on top of it, golden panels everywhere. This was a very expensive building. And so, like when the disciples are talking about, look how beautiful this building is, they had a point. It was absolutely gorgeous, no doubt. It was amazing until the year 70 AD, or AD 70. You're supposed to say the AD before, right? I don't know. Can you say it both ways? Does it matter? I don't know. Anyways, so Jesus prophesied that no stone would be left on one another, and he was right. Around that time, around the year 66, the Jews revolted against Rome and started the Jewish-Roman War. And that lasted from 66 until 73. And this was a major blow to the Jews when this temple was destroyed. The General Titus came in and he conquered the city. And there were some epic battles that took place around here. If you read the history about like the sacking of the city and how it went, it is like you're on the edge of your seat. Like, watch, if this was a movie, this would be insane. You'd be on the edge of your seat the whole time. The Jews made a first attack. They came out to battle the Romans in the valley here, and then they got pushed back. This was their last defense. The Romans had come in through here, broken down the walls, came in. They were starting to build a ramp up this side of this fortress that was right there. The Jews tunneled underneath the fortress and lit a fire so that the ramp that the Romans were building collapsed and the Romans couldn't get up. And then the Jews came out here to fight some Romans, but while they were over here, the Romans started climbing this wall over here and getting up on the wall, but that was really just a fake decoy move. The Jews had really put a bunch of timber underneath there and lit it on fire when the Romans started overcoming. I'm telling you, I'm a nerd, and I could go on for like an hour just talking about this, because to me it's like so fascinating, like, I mean, so tragic at the same time, but like epic battles of what went on, and it was about 1 million people who died in this city during this time. The Romans were really good at what they did. They starved people out. In fact, 3 years later, the Romans battled the Jews at their last stand at the fortress of Masada 3 years later after this, and that is a terribly tragic story itself, but amazing. Has anyone been to Masada? Anyone here? It's a couple people. It's amazing. If you ever get the chance to go to Israel, go to Masada. It is amazing. And I cannot believe they have not made like a movie about this. Like Ridley Scott or Michael Bay, one of those guys should make a movie about this. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. So they're going off. The whole city is again sacked and destroyed. Now, supposedly, Titus, according to outside sources, supposedly it was an accident that the temple caught on fire. Supposedly Titus didn't want to burn the whole thing down, but a drunken soldier accidentally either fired a fiery arrow into the temple or threw a torch in there. Yeah, an accident, right? I don't know about that. That is some accident to burn down a temple like that. But what happened was all that gold that was on that temple, I mean, if just the golden crown that was on top of the building melted down, that would be enough to tear. But it was covered in gold, and so the gold got everywhere through all the cracks. And so the Romans pulled that temple apart, stone by stone, so not one stone was left on it, on top of another. So Jesus' words here are completely fulfilled, just like that. So fast forwarding the next couple of thousand years, we get to today, and during that time, there's been a bunch of stuff that's happened. Did I miss? Okay, this picture here. Shortly after the city was destroyed, the Romans tried to kind of turn it into a pagan city for a very short period of time. They built up a lot of stuff here. They built up a little mini Colosseum. They erected a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount. And there's just a ton of history that happens over the next couple thousand years. The Crusaders come in eventually, when Christianity takes off, and Constantine, makes it a national religion, and Constantine's mom comes in and decides, oh, that's where Jesus died and was buried, and she sets up the Church of Byzantine right there in the city, which is probably not the right place. Most Calvary chapels believe that they found the garden tomb in Golgotha, the face of the skull, outside the city. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. I have more time with the second service. The first service, I'm trying to rush through it. You guys, I'm getting all kinds of sidetracked. I'm sorry. But tons of history takes place. The Crusaders come in, they take over the city. The Islamic faith rises up during this time. They take over the city. The Crusaders take it back and forth a couple times, until we end up with this gem of a building on the Temple Mount here. And who knows what this is? The Dome of the Rock. All right. You guys were much quicker than the first service, just so you know. So extra points for you guys. And so you can see they've actually built this up higher, this little platform on top of the mount. It's built up a little higher. And this actually is not a mosque. So most people think this is a mosque. It is not a mosque. However, this right here is a mosque that they built there. This was built hundreds of years ago. Originally, this had like a lead dome on it. Then it was changed to copper. And then just a couple decades ago, a billionaire king donated like $15 million to change this all to gold on top. So that is gold up on there. But what's the deal with the Dome of the Rock? What is all this? What does all this mean? Well, it's really just a building around a very specific rock. And what they believe is really important. And again, Muslims trace their faith, back to Abraham, right? They believe they came from the line of Abraham as well. Well, what took place on this mount? What's inside the Dome of the Rock? There's a rock. There's a rock in the middle of the Dome of the Rock. Can you guys believe it? Up here, we can see the inscriptions way up top here, and that's translated as Jesus was just a prophet, not God incarnate. So they believe Jesus was a good religious teacher or whatnot, but that he did not die. God just took him up to heaven. He's going to come back, and when he does one day, he's going to tell everyone to be good Muslims and follow the Muslim faith and all that. So anyways, so they believe that Muhammad was in Mecca at the end of his life, and he had this night journey, this magical night journey where he was transported from Mecca to, I'm trying to go back, it's not letting me. He journeys from Mecca to the mosque that's on that Temple Mount, and then he goes over to this rock and ascends to heaven, something like that. I don't know. I don't know a whole lot. We should bring Mark up here. You know so much about this stuff, right? So this all happens. The Muslims control this area up here. And what's interesting about this rock, if you look really closely, you can see, if you look really closely, it's hard, especially the farther back you sit. It's hard to see when you're looking at up close. But right here, there is a rectangular impression carved into the rock. Can anyone guess what it's believed sat there at one time? Well, so yes, you're correct in that they believe this is the rock where Abraham was, but this is a very specific impression. If indeed the temples of Solomon and Herod were built in this exact spot, the Holy of Holies might have been on this rock, and that might have sat the Ark of the Covenant. That's the speculation anyways. Again, we can't say for certain if it was or not, but it's very interesting to speculate and think about it, right? Could you imagine, I don't want to go off on, everyone get goosebumps or whatever, but could you imagine if this was built up around, the Holy of Holies built around this, and this was where the presence of God came down? It's amazing if you let yourself think about it. The Muslims will say, the temples never existed here. This is our rock. And the Jewish people will say, yes, the temples were absolutely on this location. And it's a bitter fight going on. Now, it's hard to say. If we look at this rock, that doesn't look very smooth like a temple could be built on it. But you have to remember, it's been thousands of years, right? So many crusaders came, the crusaders tore down the Temple of Jupiter. They erected their own little structure on top. That was torn down, and all this. The crusaders actually chipped away a bunch of rocks and took them home as souvenirs from the top of this mountain. So much history has been taking place here. That could have been a lot more smoother, like as if it was in a very important room, like the Holy of Holies, for example. So why did we just go through all that? We just spent like 30-something minutes, the whole time we have together to talk about this, and we haven't even talked about the scriptures. So we better get to the passage real quick. So we get to the story that we read, that we opened with today, and we have the disciples looking up at the temple, and they're like, Jesus, look how awesome this place is. And Jesus is like, talk to the hand. I don't care about that, right? Clearly that's what's happening, right? But why did the disciples even bring this up? Like, yeah, it's shiny, but surely they must know Jesus doesn't really care about those sorts of things, right? I mean, they watched him drive out the money changers and all this stuff. Now, why would they bring the subject up? Well, the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record what's going on here. But the book of Matthew, the chapter right before this, actually shows us that right before this specific conversation, Jesus goes off on the Pharisees and the religious leaders for like an entire chapter that's recorded in Matthew 23. He's calling them sons of vipers and hypocrites. I mean, he is tearing into them. He's laying it on thick, right? He talks about things like, you guys, you swear by the temple. You think this place is so important that you'll swear by it? Oh, I swear by the temple. I'll keep my word. Or, if you disrespected the temple or said anything negative about the temple, you could be in big trouble. And Jesus is like, this is just a building. You guys are hypocrites. He goes off on them. So you could imagine as they're leaving the temple, what's going through the disciples' heads. They're kind of like, Jesus, it's not all bad, right? Like, there's some good stuff that happens here. And of course there is. God ordained this to happen, right? To build these things. But Jesus is saying, and here's a picture of Jesus laying into the Pharisees right there. They're like, okay, we get it, enough. But Jesus, Jesus is saying, hey, you think this temple means something, but there's going to come a day where not one stone is left on each other, and it's not going to matter. So then Jesus goes up to, and you can go to this spot today, Davidson Center Archaeological Park at the corner of the temple, and you can see stones here that have been dropped. It's proof that no stone was left on top of the Temple Mount. So Jesus then goes up to the Mount of Olives with his disciples and begins what we call the Olivet Discourse, where he goes on to talk about a lot of stuff. But he has the perfect viewpoint of the temple in the background while you're up on the Mount of Olives. Just a beautiful viewpoint from up there. And so the disciples are questioning him, so what's verse 4? Tell us, when will these things be, and what will the sign be when these things will be fulfilled? So Jesus is, again, they're relating the destruction with the temple with the end of the world and end times, because they just can't imagine time without the temple. So Jesus, and I think this is really interesting, the first words he replies to the disciples with is, take heed that no one deceives you. Like, that's his first response to, show us a sign of the end times and tell us and teach us about all these things. The first thing he says is, don't be deceived. Well, we've had a lot of people try and deceive us about what the end times are, or about false messiahs and, cults and different religions. We could talk about Joseph Smith and Charles Taze Russell and the Waco wacko guy, David Koresh, that guy, oh my gosh. Lots of false leaders, right? And as Jesus is talking about these things, he's doing two things. He's talking about the immediate future and the far off future. Immediate prophecy within like 70 years and the 7-year tribulation time period that takes place in the future. And it's important to know these are two different things. Now, this might seem confusing and like, why would Jesus do that? Well, the prophets did it all the time throughout the Old Testament. Prophets would talk about what's going on and then future prophecies. So Jesus was in good company when he would do that. So it's up to us to sort through the rest of the scriptures, to seek diligently and study books like Daniel and Ezekiel and Revelations and Thessalonians and all these other books, and combine our knowledge together. So what Calvary Chapel teaches, and what many scholars believe, and certainly what we teach here, is that the rapture is going to happen first, where God calls up all the Christians to heaven, and that's going to start the 7-year period of tribulation. Now, if you don't believe that or you disagree with that and you want to argue your points, I encourage you to come up after the service and argue your points next week with Pastor Joe. He would love to talk to you about that stuff, right? I'm just kidding. I'm going to get an email or a text I just know it. Anyways, but he says, don't let anyone deceive you, first and foremost. But then he goes on to say, for many will come, verse 6, many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and will deceive many. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. So he's saying, hey, don't worry when you hear about wars and rumors of wars. For nation will rise up against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We can say that's happening specifically just in the last couple of months. Like, what is Russia doing, and Ukraine and all this craziness that's happening right now in our time? And there will be earthquakes in various places. It seems like every other day we hear about an earthquake in a different area of the world that wreaks, mass destruction, wreaks havoc. And there will be famines, and there'll be troubles. Well, just this week, I don't need baby formula in my life, and my kids are all grown up, but if you're a new mother and you need baby formula, that's could be considered a problem of a famine right now, right? And troubles. I mean, our economy is like crazy right now. I don't normally like to brag about like expensive places that I go, but this morning I came here. I just got back from a very expensive trip. I went to go get gas this morning, and I mean, I felt like there was some famine and troubles. I'll tell you what. I don't know if I'll be going on any vacations this summer just because the gas prices alone. Crazy. And these are the beginnings of sorrow. So we're going to end there, and this is kind of like a cliffhanger. The first service, it said Ephesians on the announcements that next week we'd start Ephesians. So I was like, what? Oh no, like Joe only gave me the first. If I knew we weren't going to study the next half of the verse, I would have gone through the whole thing. But I think we're going to continue on next week. Otherwise, that would have been like a season finale, like cliffhanger. You have to wait till like fall to like get the rest of the story, epic cliffhangers. But you can go home. You can read the rest of the chapter by yourself. By the way, you can do some homework and read this. But we're talking about end of days, and I'll go ahead and ask the band to come on up while we wrap up here. The end of this chapter, around verse 32, it says, "No one knows the day or the hour that Jesus is going to come back." And this is specifically talking about the second coming of Jesus, which is different from the rapture. And it says, "No one knows the day or the hour that this is going to happen." But I saw a TikTok video last month, and this is Rich, hear me out. This guy, he was talking about that this verse supposedly only refers to the second coming of Jesus, but he talked about there's a bunch of reasons why he can pinpoint exactly when the rapture is going to be, which has been, so many people have like guessed when the rapture is going to be over the years, and they've all been wrong, right? But this guy, this one caught my attention. He said, we know that's going to be at the end of Pentecost, and it's going to be in June. And I looked up the dates, and I was looking at Pentecost is on June 5th. It's 50 days after Easter, so that puts it on, June 5th, which is a Sunday, and then Monday too. So supposedly on June 7th, about that time, a day, which just so happens to be my birthday, I'm just saying. And it's one of those milestone birthdays, if you know what I mean. I'm turning 25. I'm not. It's not 25. So I'm not saying that's going to happen on my birthday, but if it does, coincidence? I don't know. So I invite you all to celebrate on my birthday in heaven. Just have to RSVP. It's $50 a ticket. I'll start collecting next week. I'm kidding. Joe is never going to let me back up on the stage again. I'm just kidding. But, I mean, who knows the day or the hour? It could be anytime, anywhere. But, I want to wrap this all up by saying that, we should be living in preparation for these times, for this day that comes. And the good news is that we don't even need a temple anymore. They're planning on building a new temple. In fact, they've been for years. The Temple Institute has been collecting and getting the supplies ready, and the robes for the priests and all these things. But did you guys know, just this month, I think it was like May, I forget the date, it was like May 3rd or 5th or something like that, they officially started building the third temple that's going to go up on the mountain someday. And when I say officially building, like they got some stones, and there's like a rabbi like chipping at some stones, and supposedly they're going to use this stone to go in the new temple. Problem is, this Dome of the Rock is right where they want to put the temple, right? Well, Revelation talks about, the Jews building a new temple and it being right next to the pagan temple. So who knows what that's going to look like? Are they going to move the Dome of the Rock and allow the Jews to build a temple there? There's already the mosque there on the other side, right, that we talked about. Are they just going to squeeze the temple in between or to the side? Who knows? I think they could put it anywhere. God can make any of that happen. I don't know if it really matters. But it's going to happen one day. They're going to build the third temple. But we don't need that temple, because 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 says this, that do you not know that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? Isn't that amazing? We go back and we talk about the Holy of Holies, where that mercy seat is, and God's presence can come down and be in that place. That's here in our hearts. That's amazing. Like, we are so unworthy to be that. But if you ask Jesus to forgive you of your sins and to come into your heart, he will do that. And then our bodies are the dwelling place of the Lord. That blows my mind. And all these temples, they look like different places. My temple, it's starting to feel more like a bouncy house. Some of us have like mega mansion temples. I'm going for the Sistine Chapel look, trying to get some paintings. But we don't need this place. And I know you guys are always distracted when you come in here. You're like, oh, what a beautiful place to worship. It's like the Crystal Cathedral in here, right? This place has been great for us, and we're building that. We're doing a lot of work out there on our outside venue. We have some wonderful volunteers doing amazing work getting that place ready for us next week. And we try, and it's going to be beautiful, but we don't need these places to worship the Lord. We have his temple right here in our hearts. So, but the last thing I'll leave you with is God's still at work on our temples here on earth, right? Like he's chiseling away at us. What I didn't say earlier is in 1 Kings, it records how all the quarry work for the stones building all this, they were done outside the city. And you can go there today, and you can go under the tunnels, and you can see the foundations of a wall. There are some huge stones. There's this one stone that's no joke, as big as this entire cutout of the stage. Massive, massive stones. And the Bible says they fit perfectly. They were made in the quarry, shipped to the Temple Mount, put together, and they fit so perfectly that you couldn't fit the blade of a knife in between the cracks. That's some crazy engineering right there. Well, God's working on us, and one day it's going to be amazing. But a verse I'll leave you with is 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 5, that says, "And you are living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple. What's more, you are his holy priests. Through the mediation of Jesus Christ, you offer spiritual sacrifice that pleases God." That's awesome. So we're works in progress. We're stones being chipped away and built to fit into eternity. So the next time my wife calls me a blockhead, I'm going to take that as a compliment. Let's stand and we'll pray. So Father, I thank you for this time to be able to worship you, and we can worship you through song, through the study of your word, God. And I pray that as we go our separate ways this week, that you would just instill in our hearts a spirit of confidence and boldness and joy, God, knowing that, man, when we're forgiven and we have the light of the world living and dwelling inside of us, and we have angels that can conquer armies, in our lives, God, that we're unstoppable. So I pray that you would send your people out into the world this week and give them boldness to share the message, to invite people to come to church, God. That would just do amazing things in people's hearts, God. That we could rest knowing that even though we may think our world is falling apart, that it's not, that you have a plan in place. Even though the things we build up as the important structures and parts of our life come tumbling down, that you have a plan the whole time. And if we just wait and are patient on you, God, that your plan will slowly unfold and you'll bring us to where we need to be. So if you haven't accepted Jesus into your life this morning and you want all these things that we're talking about, it's so easy. All you have to do is say, Jesus, I confess I'm a sinner. I'm asking you to forgive me of my sins and to come into my life. I confess that you were killed and rose again, and you've forgiven me of my sins. Please come into my heart. And that's it. That's all you have to do. And if you say that prayer this morning, you are saved, and you will spend eternity in heaven, and he will come into your life and do amazing things. So may the Lord bless you, keep you, and cause his face to shine upon you this week and give you peace.
service, 10 o'clock, I think, right? 10 o'clock next week. Peace.